I want to continue now with some introductions here at the head table. To my left, at the end of the table, is the Associate Dean of Students and Dean of Women here at Augsburg College. And she too has given valuable assistance in the preparation of these events, Ms. Fern Martinson. Mr. Burton Fossey, the Vice President for Business Affairs here at Augsburg College, was kind enough to go out to the airport and pick up Mr. Ware, our speaker, and his assistant, and he is here at the head table. And I'll introduce Mr. Du Bois from Mr. Ware's office at the same time, since they came together. Then I want to acknowledge the presence and the valuable assistance, the great assistance of our Executive Secretary of our Centennial Committee, Miss Gerda Mortensen. And we wouldn't be able to have this without her. Now, there are a lot of other people that I should introduce, including my wife, so I might as well have her stand, too, for a bow at this time. And then we want to have you get a good look at our distinguished visitor from Lebanon, Dr. Charles Malik, who will be addressing the symposium session following our banquet. Dr. Malik. The other people at the head table I'm going to refrain from introducing until the program proper, except I want to acknowledge the presence and ask Mrs. W.P. Martin if she will stand, Dr. Martin's wife. Thank you. The dean has reminded me that there is a student member on our Academic Events Committee, and he is also the chairman of our Student Convocation Committee, and I want Mr. Lauren Dunham to stand. Lauren, where are you? Oh, there he is. Now with that, I'm going to let you go to your dessert. One of the great advantages that we have being located here in Minneapolis and here in this part of the city is that we have such splendid resources close to us. I have indicated already the assistance provided by friends from the University of Minnesota and from the business community in planning this symposium. And we have asked tonight that one of the professors at the University of Minnesota, particularly interested in the type of work that our speaker is engaged in, should come to be with us, introduce the speaker, and act as the moderator at this session. We have asked Dr. W.P. Martin, the head of the Department of Soil Science at the university, to be here this evening. Dr. Martin is the immediate past president of the Soil Science Society of America, a fellow of the American Society of Agronomy, a member of the Soil Conservation Committee. And we welcome him to Augsburg College tonight and to this session, and we shall ask him to introduce the speaker of the evening and also to handle the questions which will follow. Dr. Martin.
President Mrs. Anderson, Dr. Malik, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored and it's a pleasure to introduce this fine gentleman to you. I'm very much impressed with this symposium, with its structure, with its theme, World Starvation Disaster in the 70s. It's very appropriate today. Of course, when one speaks of world starvation, one thinks of the population explosion. I heard one describe this as evidence that people obviously have taken leave of their senses. That is a pun. CENSUS. I apologize. Let me let me start on a somewhat serious note and quote from Dr. Vaughan, president of the National Science Foundation. He stated that if man ever resolves the changing and perplexing problems in his relationship to his environment, it must be on a very broad and comprehensive theme. Such problems involve many competitive interests, including not only government, but also business, industry, public health, conservation, recreation, agriculture, economics, and political and social sciences, and many more, and etc. Certainly it seems to me that your program is pointing up the fact that many disciplines and many interests must be resolved if we are to moderate world starvation and moderate this disaster in the 70s. And our speaker this evening, Dr. Ware, representing the corporate industry, one of the big ones in this country that is doing something about it on a worldwide basis, seems to me as an excellent choice for this program. He does represent a very remarkable company. It's one that many of us have been looking at and involved with one way or another for a long time. I believe one of the first projects, commercial projects I had at the Ohio State University, where I was some 15 or 20 years ago, under Dr. Gillis, Dr. Ware, was a commercial project with your company. They've done other interesting things. They've pioneered the computerized method of farm management recommendations. This has to shake down a bit, but it's rather good and rather unique and typical of this company Mr. Ware heads. They're aesthetically inclined. If none of you have yet seen The Garden England, an absolutely magnificent movie, you must do so. They have a new one now on The Garden Japan. Mr. Ware was telling Harriet and me about, and I can hardly wait to see it. This is the kind of company that he represents. More specifically, International Minerals and Chemical Corporation is the world's largest producer of fertilizers and fertilizer materials, and it's a leading producer of industrial minerals, chemicals, food, and feed ingredients. The company employs some 9,000 people in 200 mines, plants, and offices completely around the world. Active in world food and agriculture programs, Mr. Ware is a member and former chairman of the Board of Trustees of the American Freedom from Hunger Foundation, an arm of the Food and Ag Organization of the United Nations. He's director for the Foundation of American Agriculture, a trustee of the National 4-H Foundation, and a director of the American Mining Congress, and a number of other items of this caliber. I should mention personally that he began his career as a design engineer in the aircraft industry after graduation from Cornell University, and in World War II he served in the Special Devices Services Division of the U.S. Navy and was a member of the team that succeeded in recruiting leading German scientists for work in the United States. A notable and difficult achievement, I might add. After the war, he was a management consultant. Then he moved to IMC in 1947. He moved up as chief engineer in 49, engineering vice president in 52, administrative vice president in 57, president in 58, and chairman of the board in 1964. It must be the aircraft industry because he flew up rather quickly, and he's been flying ever since. He came up here on short notice in his own plane. The place where he gained fame recently was in a publication that has gone round the world called The Quiet Revolution. It's most appropriate that Mr. Ware this evening should discuss with you isolationism and world food. Mr. Ware.
Dr. Anderson, members of the Centennial Committee, Dr. Malik, Dr. Martin, Dr. Berg. I especially want to thank you, Dr. Berg, for this very warm introduction. A centennial celebration to a businessman is an event of unusual inspiration. For business survives by harnessing man's ambition to the needs of his fellow man. And human nature being what it is, with human needs and human ambitions ever changing, few businesses manage to survive 100 years. And fewer still contrive to continue along the same path for so long a time. And this background of constant change and uncertainty in business makes one exceedingly respectful of institutional tenure in any form, even as a college. My respect for this occasion, therefore, commands my very best thoughts about future opportunities for man. For, as always, on an anniversary, an achievement of this level, past achievement, turns our attention to the future, and on a centennial, we look to the long-term future. Therefore, to equal this occasion, I must first make reference to a past achievement for which I have the greatest appreciation. In my dedication to business, I see a world that has made some progress over the last 100 years in learning rudimentary means for relating the work of man the world over to the needs of his fellow man. The relationship of which I speak does not yet embrace even a majority of the world's people, but it does demonstrate that man can achieve a broad interdependence even in global scope. By any measure, what we have seen of this interdependence evolve thus far may be considered downright crude when measured against its potential for development. But it does hold forth the brightest prospects for what would otherwise be a dreary and a very dim future. A world of 3 billion people, half of whom even now are malnourished and starving. A world increasing in population at such a clip that before the end of this century it will exceed 6 billion in number. A world of sharply limited farmlands, arable soils which cannot possibly be doubled to keep pace with the doubling population. A world of rising expectations and deepening disparities in which rapid economic development has become a function of peace, and greatly increased food production is the only alternative to famine and chaos. But now, after all man's history of fighting over land, we've finally devised weapons so powerful as to rise above the territorial imperative. under the imperative of finding ways to concert our efforts and save our species from the long trek back down the trail of history, the new weapons of man's productive might may be unleashed. Succeeding waves of scientific discovery and technological application, however, may break over the shores of want. New science and human invention may greatly improve the life of man in his increasing number. If we can but find the way to concert our efforts, to bridge the gap between tribal and technological man, I think we may make our greatest discovery. In my dedication to enterprise, I believe we can. I believe man has shown the capacity to control his own destiny. And yet I wonder at the dimensions of the task and the little time that remains to avert what all past experience predicts would be certain disaster before the end of this century. It's a little heavy after a meal of this delightful scope. But it is a profound moment in the history of man. For as I see it, the world is in the grip of three implacable threes, as I call them. The first is those 3 billion more people who are coming to dine at the world's table. Demographers are certain about this. They determine that some 60% of the world's population is under 30 years of age right now. And 47% of the world's population is between the ages of 29 and 15, the peak of childbearing years. And the others will soon be there at that time, at the end of this century, from this group. The children are already born who will father and mother the oncoming billions. Surely there must be a new sense of responsibility and procreativity, but there is no prospect that so many can be led to realize it soon enough to avert this kind of a course. No, the demographers tell us that the world's 3 billion population will soon become 6 billion before the end of the century. 3 billion more have to be fed. The second of my implacable threes is 3%, that tiny portion of the global surface that offers arable soils for food production. Just 3%. And the third of my implacable threes is the short period of time, the very short period of time in which this doubling of population will take place. Now, how long is 30 years? Well, for most of you, perhaps it may seem an eternity. But the world, as it turns, for this it is very little time. In the past 25 years, the world's farmlands have only been expanded 25%. And if we used all the technological skills at our hand as we now know them, according to Dr. Lyle Brady, Assistant Secretary of Agriculture, United States Department of Agriculture, we could only add 50% to the arable soils of the world. Clearly, the arable soils of the world are a precious resource, and we will have to produce more food from each square foot of soil in these years ahead. Clearly, too, we will have to use all the best and the most advanced tools to do this. Now, what are the tools and where do they come from? Well, I use the word tools in the very broadest sense. And number one on my list would be the best of all that has gone before in this world. all the experience, our laws, our legal standards, our moral codes, our ethics, our philosophies. That would be my number one tool. Now, imperfect as this might have been, the instruction is clearly there in the culture and the traditions on which new concepts must be built. The implacable threes will impose tremendous demands on education in this short 30 years. And a basic education through college graduation occupies only the first 21 years of life on the average. But the other great tools don't come as quickly, nor do they come as easily. Take television. It provides a very powerful instrument for human enlightenment. It's taken 25 years to develop it to where it can be useful from its oscilloscope stage to the present imperfect state of television as we now know it and think about it. Our 30-year time span then would leave us only about 5 more years for its perfection. And it would allow no time at all for all the years of early work that trace all the way back to 1831 with Michael Faraday's principle, which made it possible in the first place. Atomic power has taken 25 years from the time it was first demonstrated as a feasible phenomena to today, where it is now competitive with ordinary commercial power from coal, oil, and gas. And it will take many more years yet before we can expect to realize its really greatest promise for efficient earth moving, for mining, for building of harbors, for changing rivers, streams, and so on. Computers for perspective, jet transports for direct personal communication, and satellites in their myriad service forms. None of these great tools have been brought forward without long development, and we cannot expect others to suddenly materialize in our short 30 years without many years of development. The industrial development which the world so desperately needs involves great risks, and it often requires long periods of time. Still, we must develop great new industrial strengths to meet the needs of the world. For in my lexicon, the tools for increasing food production reach far beyond the farm. They include the application of technology in building big new mines, chemicals, processes, power and machinery type plants are tools as I think of them. The farm and the factory are truly interdependent, for industry is built upon successful farming, and industry in turn provides the tools for progress in agriculture. To derive more food from the world's limited soils, agriculture must be armed with tools of ever-broadening capabilities. This is not to say that the plow and the scythe will soon disappear from the world agricultural scene, but rather that these must be joined in an increasing array of tools, on a rising sophistication, if you will, of machinery, of chemical fertilizers, weed and pest controls, new genetic strains, growth regulators, computer-powered agronomic systems, and so on ad infinitum. And even clear out at the top end of our scale of technological skills, where we are literally reaching for the moon, we find the most brilliant scientific and business minds teamed in a space program from which 20,000 to 30,000 inventions are just 1 year's technological fallout already benefiting the farmer in meteorological affairs, in topographical studies, and diverse other applications. If you haven't followed this last one very closely, watch it as it unfolds in the newspapers. It seems that almost each month turns up a new application for satellites. Thus, our world of creeping civilization and skyrocketing technology moves even further into the abstract relationship of interdependent man, far removed from the readily visible cause and effect relationships. Now, here is a marvel of organization that we take for granted here in our society. It reaches all the way from basic, warm, compassionate human needs, clear across scales of values to the sheer abstraction of new leverage tools for increasing the worth of man to his society, to his species. It's fascinating in its infinite flexibility. It's exciting. Sometimes it's awesome in its effectiveness. Man's skills and efforts translated into the common denominator of money and attracted to investment, to funding, become the instruments for increasing the effect of man's skills and efforts, if we stop to think about it. This is the miracle, but it only works so long as the investment is sound and solid integrity of the money vehicle as abstract man is preserved. An investment in education and experience to equip man for his role in this kind of a society may not be easily priced, but there must be a return, whether he comes from such an institution as this to become an airline pilot, a banker, a baseball player, or even a farmer. The funding of investment in enterprise involves relatively finite values, but the return is required, no less. From research through patents, from development through manufacturing facilities, from market distribution services to the customer. Thus, modern enterprise assembles the wide diversity of man's skills to amplify their effect, not by chaining them in any sort of a lockstep, but by setting their skills free and unfettered to find their values in the infinite interplay of human needs and human ambitions. Not long ago, I went down in one of our big new potash mines up in Canada, down 2/3 of a mile through a hole in the ground that took 5 years and $10 million to sink. And then I went out miles into the distance through the tunnels underground to the farthest corner of this $65 million mine that took some 15 years to build. And there, deep beneath the prairies of the Saskatchewan, was a man operating a huge, continuous mining machine, a gargantuan affair that chews its way into the mining wall, digging potash that would help a farmer in some rice paddy on the other side of the world, that would help him to grow a bigger crop to feed his fellow man. Up through the mill and refining, into trains, onto ships, out of ports, over the seas, and off of the docks at a distant destination, in carts and bags and baskets. It would move as though drawn through some great force of nature, magnetized by distant need, carried every bit of the way by a desire for personal gain. And where each personal gain is realized, right down to the final value of a bigger and a better crop, it sends back a message along the chain, a message of money, money made shiny hard by values realized, and the message says more. Surely the miracle of this system is as great as the miracle which deposited this precious mineral resource for potash beneath these Canadian provincial prairies hundreds of millions of years ago to await the science of plant nutrition, the engineering skills to wrest it from the earth, and this time of its need. Yet, I think we tend to take it for granted. Those of us who are closest to this miracle, we're so caught up in our competitive race with our fellow man that we tend to take this miracle working system for granted. And we're even shocked when others question or challenge it, as of course they do. For many people, and perhaps for most, they see mines and plants as only rough, imposing piles of brick and mortar and steel and tanks and equipment. Yet those of us who plan and build and run these mines and plants know that each represents thousands of man's lifetimes, that every brick, girder, carries a life value in the investment that it represents. Now, this is where oversimplification can hurt us most. This is where easy expedience with the public thought processes can cripple this valuable and important system. Because large-scale, high-volume, peak-efficiency production facilities, the kind that bring into focus our most advanced technology, involve large, long-term capital commitments. These are the plants of the future, the kind that can meet the needs of our time, and they require great skills. They require care and understanding in their every part. Take a modern mining complex of, say, $100 million. That kind of an investment projected over 30 years at only 6% must return in that period of time $575 million. Or a 10% return, which one can experience in different parts of this world, over 30 years, represents a promise to investors of $1,570 million, to say nothing of the related commitments by investors in electrical power, in rail, and other related facilities required to serve such a plant. But the benefits along the way are absolutely breathtaking. Our new mines in Canada, 3.5 million tons of potash per year is now being produced there. That's 15% of the world's supply of this vital mineral. It provides 1,500 jobs and about $1 million a month of payroll, indirectly employing 7,500 other people in this vast prairie province where you could hardly find a farmer. He was spread so far and so wide. It produces at $400,000 a month royalty payments and taxes. It provides some $50 million a year in rail services. And it gives some $75 million a year on the plus side of Canada's balance of payments. And I can't go any further without mentioning $125 million which our company borrowed from the Prudential Insurance Company, which came from millions, literally millions, of policyholders. This, I will submit, is the measure of but one instrument, one productive leverage tool in the arsenal which must be forged to win the war on hunger. It is as far removed from its mining forebears as you are from, and I are, and you and I are, from the paddy rice farmer it serves on the other side of the world. And yet, it's as interdependent. You and I, we just don't know what it is to live at the very edge of life. We're healthy and we're well fed. We live as a part of an economic system which serves and touches our every moment so deftly that we hardly notice it. We've even learned to live in extensions of ourselves, with wheels and wings and telephones and radio and radar and television and computers, even satellites, extending our senses, our thoughts, and our very presence. Small wonder we have become sensitized to the slightest blip, the least interference, or the least threat to our productive tools. We tend to withdraw when we see the libraries that we've sent to open new vistas in other lands going up in flames. We try to keep our cool when expropriation threatens the integrity of our capital investments abroad. We extend a hand to others who need our help, and if we seem a little too aggressive, it may be because we're simply unable to know the sensitivities that go with day-to-day survival when there is so little for people at the edge of life. We withdraw when we're burned, when our hand is burned, and some say this is our isolationist character. Others badger us and drive us out as imperialists, or some other word of that type, and we are bewildered. It's painful to watch time and resources being squandered by inept systems in a hungry world with neither time nor resources to spare. And sometimes it's tragicomic. Listen to Khrushchev exhorting his comrades at the Volga chemical plant just 3 years ago, calling for, under the title of his talk, the effective use of every acre of irrigated lands. This is what he said. Comrades, not long ago, I wish I could do this with a Russian accent. Not long ago, I wrote a note to the Presidium of the Central Committee. In it, I expressed my opinion of the necessity of increasing the production of mineral fertilizer. In this report, I demonstrated what the consequences are when we underestimate production and the wrong attitude towards the use of fertilizers. Recently, in a foreign paper, Mr. Khrushchev goes on, I saw a picture and read a story, how we Russians use mineral fertilizer. They pictured it piled up near the railroad stations and said in the wintertime, when it is covered with snow, the children toboggan down the piles. This is not fiction, this is true fact. We do not produce mineral fertilizer, Khrushchev continued. Even what we do produce is very badly used in most cases. It appears that leaders of some collective farms and state farms have to be constantly reminded to take the fertilizer apportioned to them from the elevator storage places, and sometimes the fertilizer lays there for months. So spoke Mr. Khrushchev. And barely 18 months later, or just 18 months ago, his successor Brezhnev was offering 50 and even 100% price increases in a new incentive program for the Russian farmer. Brezhnev spoke to a plenary session of the Central Committee on, and this is the title of his talk, Urgent Measures for the Further Development of Agriculture in the USSR. And here's a very brief quote from his very long talk. Comrades, the Presidium considers it necessary to report that the proposed volume of grain purchases will not fully satisfy the growing needs of the country and the creation of state reserves. To end the low profitability of grain production, most important levers for raising labor productivity will be needed in the next few years. End of his quotes. I think those two quotations are pretty good evidence that even in a developed nation, the leverage tools for increasing food production require skill, and they require understanding, and they require incentive for their proper use and application. History remembers Marie Antoinette hearing of people starving and saying, "Let them eat cake." She was unaware of what was going on around her. Yet today, well-meaning people would make the same kind of mistake with the leverage tools required in agriculture. In this context, chemical fertilizers have become a highly sophisticated economic tool for producing more food. They must produce many times their worth in crop values. They are wasted on the farmer who lacks the instruction of their proper use and any desire for proper gain or personal gain. And so we see this high precision, high performance economic juggernaut of ours at work with its capital forming leverage tools against a backdrop of rampant hunger and want in the world. And it seems that we are each a part of our capital forming system, and that we are all children of its amazing care. And then we see Lewis Harris and Stanford University and other opinion researchers who have been talking with you, the students, the student world, you who have the future in the palm of your hands. And we see that 88% of college seniors want to stay away from enterprise, and that students headed for careers in business consider creativity and originality of less importance than those interested in other fields of graduate study. It is clear that somewhere along the way, in the spectacular ascent of enterprise, in our utter fascination with it, we may have lost touch. Perhaps in the citizenship of enterprise, we may have been insensitive to the educational processes and to the human values of creativity and individuality. But more likely, I believe we have been insensitive to the need to communicate the sensitivities of enterprise itself for creativity, for individuality, and for the intellect, because these are the driving force of successful enterprise. It goes nowhere without these. It doesn't even come into being without these in the first place. Invention and responsiveness is the name of the business game. And we have built the prototype for a magnificent economic system, and we have pushed it to great human benefit. But perhaps in preoccupation with its perfection, with the sheer challenge that we have, we've become walled in. We've become isolated from those who will need this magnificent production machine the most. Isolationism is two-edged ignorance. It hurts those inside and it hurts those outside. How then can we bridge the gap which isolates between creative, intellectual man from our capital forming system, the central instrument for our magnificent production machine? And if we cannot bridge this gap, How can we bridge the gap between tribal and technological man to feed the world? Ladies and gentlemen, I've tried to convey a sense of the excitement, a sense of the fascination of enterprise, and a sense of its responsibilities. And I hope with all of my heart that I have succeeded, because you need enterprise, and it needs you. It needs your moral, spiritual, and ethical commitment to mankind. The world must have it to maintain order and to feed the oncoming billions. I thank you.
Dr. Ware, that was entirely appropriate to the theme and very enjoyable. I was glad to hear you stress the need for more students graduating and moving career-wise into our corporate industry. I believe that progress is being made. As I recall, in Dean Berg's Institute of Agriculture in the last several years, upwards of 60% now are moving into this category we would call business, industry, and commerce. This is quite a change from what it used to be just a while ago. So progress is being made. I was also very happy to hear you put the stress on research. We're a research-oriented institution, and I thought it was very good to point out that we sometimes fuss a little about the billions going into the space program, getting people to the moon relative to some of these very real problems, and rightly so. I think we should fuss about this a bit. The fact remains, though, that there is this fallout which has application broadly, and certainly we see this in agriculture. And your company, it seems to me, is pointing this up also. I did have the pleasure, I might add, of attending the dedication exercises for a new $9 million research complex at Libertyville, not too far from Chicago. It was appropriately labeled a photosynthesis symposium. A fertilizer company supporting such a symposium is rather interesting, but it's very logical. The capture of energy by plants. Plants must be fed minerals, some of this potash that was mentioned. We must grow plants if we grow food, and food is very essential to these expanding millions. We have about 5 or 10 minutes for questions. We want to keep it at about that level because we must move next door for Dr. Malik. But I'm sure there may be a question or two, and we would be very happy to entertain these at the present time, and Mr. Ware would be very happy to respond to them. I might just pose one to get the ball rolling. I am interested in, from the corporate point of view, we must not only have a product, must be available, but we must have a lot of things that make it possible for people to use the product. This is certainly true of fertilizers. We know that American industry is moving very quickly to provide the product in many nations of the world. We know how difficult it is to affect adoption of new technology. Would you be willing to predict a little from the experience of IMC worldwide, what kind of progress is really being made? Or how would you predict that we will move this along very, very quickly in order to accommodate this serious need that's pointed up here? Would you be willing to speculate on that, Mr. Ware?
You've asked me a very broad question. As you can see, I've become very concerned about world food and for some time. We felt that there had to be an awareness of this phenomenon ahead. I don't have to go back very far, but what we were looking at fertilizer as simply a waste product. And today we're looking at it very differently. And part of my message was to emphasize its economic leverage aspect as an aid to the farmer to produce more. The way businesses operate, it is only now beginning to get this kind of attention. There is great capacity for production of these particular materials. My biggest concern goes beyond that, in that people will not understand it for its values, or that they will not understand how they are supposed to get value back from it. We've had people come into our offices on occasion and say, now we have a situation in a country and they need some fertilizer. Now they've got to have it very, very low cost. They can't spend very much money on it. Well, we said, really, do you realize how this system works? Do you really realize that there is such a thing as an honorable profit? Do you realize that the man who gets the product must get 3 to 10 times as much back for it? And by the way, what kind of people are you talking about? Do they know enough to go out to measure to see that they got back the value? Just the mere act of measuring and knowing how much has been produced on the soil before, and separating out the variables, the many, many variables that get into farming. Dr. Martin mentioned a moment ago the computer and its application in our business. Now, we find that this idea of a magical powder sprinkled on the soil is something that is so abstract in character that's not really understood and appreciated. So in a way, I'm going kind of far out in answering your question, because my biggest concern has to do with, can it be applied effectively? The United Nations recently had a study that they let out on some 1,100, I think it's 1,100 different experiments in some 14 different countries. And they said the product yield a 77% increase with all variables, all things held constant. That is, not much change in agricultural practices and so on down the line. And we listened to this and we said, what a catastrophe, because it should have given back 300 to 1,000 times or more its value. And it should be used in concert with all kinds of skills. It in itself is a skill, its application, its use. I think there's a tremendous capacity for producing this. My biggest concern is the responsibility that goes with its application. There's where its value is really going to be found. Or there, on the other hand, is where precious mineral resources, precious other resources could otherwise be vitiated. Of course, the problem in this kind of a business is that it is very large in its volume and its characteristics. Companies that are in the field that produce the products for it produce with large investments of the kind that I've just mentioned, of the size of our new potash operations in Saskatchewan, and they don't seem to lack for the ability to invest in these things. But it would be a chaos, too, if in our zeal to rush out to supply this market, there was tremendous capacity that was built into the whole system, and then there wasn't this capacity at the other end to take it and work with it. You know, if you stop to think of it in world need terms, not only isn't there enough food in the world, but if you follow that through to a logical economic analysis, there isn't enough money in the world to do all that is required. These things go together. In fact, the biggest capital formation base that there is agriculture. Everything is built on this foundation. So as you build these things on this foundation, probably the best indicator that you can build anything else is first to get the capital formation base fully built. Well, I submit that the largest number of people in the world are devoted to agriculture, and that just a few dollars change in a year on the whole of agriculture throughout the world can generate a tremendous new resource of capital, which you have the election of using as you will in trying to keep this foundation in its balance with the things that sit on top of it. Now, maybe I've gone too far, but you sure asked me a very general question. Thank you.
Well, the fact of the matter is, I have three questions that are essentially interrelated, and which in essence you've answered. But let me put them, and perhaps you may want to make one or two other comments. They're personified or integrated in this one. How do you propose to bridge the tribal technological gap? But let me hasten to the second one. Who is going to supply the original capital necessary to develop industry in underdeveloped countries? These are interrelated, and you have spoken on the subject. Do you want to say anything else?
Well, I'd just like to make sure on that first one that we understand that what I was trying to say in my talk was that this is the way to bridge it, is to get educated, apply yourself in any field effectively, and in this working relationship we have, which we call an economy, this is a structure in what, no matter what you do, I believe you indirectly feed back to serve agriculture. We were talking the 20 to 30,000 inventions a moment ago that come out of the moon program. The airplane I came up in here tonight was made possible through space exploration efforts. The instruments in it, the whole economics of that plane were made possible through those various things, even though we haven't yet put our foot on the moon. Now, what was the second one? The second one had to do with capital and where are we going to get it, and I tried to mention the fact that I think the best place in the world to start is to work with agriculture. I believe that we are going to see, and we must see in the near future here, great attention given to using what resource capital we have in a basic industrial way. And I think we will have to perhaps forego many other things that we might like to have. This is not an easy thing to realize, but I think that the trend and the shift that is taking place in, sometimes it's called political economics, may bring us there. There may be very sophisticated devices which will do this, and if not, of course, we are going to become more and more aware of the almost incalculable values of man and his life as we hear of tragedies like Bihar in India, and we watch a country that has so much potential on, paradoxically, one of the important soils of the world, India, as it struggles through this area. The biggest way to help this is to get agriculture to be that base generating resource for capital. And from there, the underdeveloped nation can start off. We've made some mistakes. We've tried as a nation to invest and to help others in different parts of the world as they had aspirations for the more spectacular, the airline kind of an operation, which economically wasn't really a viable thing, but which they felt was important. And other people, as they built plants that perhaps came ahead of having a successful agriculture. We've got an awfully good bit of this to live by for a period until we can put this agricultural base underneath. Any other questions?
This is it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.